few years ago, I had a dog-sitting business with regular clients. One of those regular clients was a lady with a big nice house. There was a really long driveway leading up to the house, and it was tucked far back from the residential roads. It was somehow isolated while being in a dark residential neighborhood. No one could drive to the house without being noticed. No one could park on the adjacent streets, and it would be very unusual for anyone to be walking up to the house or through the yard without having already parked in the driveway. The last time my house or dog sat there, everything began as usual. I fed the dogs, gave them their various meds, and played with them for a while watching movies. Best job ever. Eventually I got sleepy and I went to bed in the master bedroom, per order. This room has huge beautiful windows with a view of the driveway, the only normal access point. I liked that about the room. After browsing on my phone in bed, I turned everything off and was trying to go to sleep. As I'm laying there, staring at the ceiling, deep in thought, I'm snapped to total awareness. Nothing changed. No one came up the driveway. Everything was silent. And yet, I started to feel very uneasy. The hair starts to stand up on the back of my neck. A voice in my head is urgently stating, "You're being watched. You're being watched. Someone is watching you." My heart rate starts to pick up. I've never experienced anything like this, and I couldn't explain it in the least. I called my boyfriend immediately, grabbed my stuff, and ran to my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the driveway. I glanced around the house while I was leaving, and I saw nothing and no one. When I got home, I checked every door to make sure it was locked, and I slept on the couch with a view of both entry points. The paranoia slowly disappeared, and I was eventually able to sleep. The next day, I returned in the morning and took care of the dogs, gave them love, their meds, took them out to go potty, and to give them breakfast. I started walking through the house toward the back where the master bedroom is, and again, I started feeling really strange. Not a watched feeling this time, but a high alert sense that things were off. I began to notice that candy wrappers were out that weren't there the night before. Doors were open that I specifically closed to keep the dogs corralled. Things were moved. I left again and called my boyfriend to stay with me. I couldn't be there alone. Someone was absolutely in the house the night prior. I wondered if maybe someone in the family stopped by, but I am always given a heads up with lots of warning before someone comes over. It's not too uncommon for the owner's son to stop by, but he has my number and he always gives me a heads up. I call the owner and tell her what I noticed. She tells me that she'll call around and see if anyone had stopped by. She calls me back in under an hour and assures me that no one did. "It must be that old ghost," she says, and then she giggles. What a relief that she was taking my safety concerns so serious. I tell her I'm having my boyfriend come over just to be cautious, and she doesn't mind. A few hours later, me and my boyfriend get to the house. He checks it downstairs. Absolutely never am I to go upstairs, and everything is fine. We're hanging out for hours, playing with the dogs and watching movies. I left my boyfriend in the living room, and I walk past the front door, and I go to the bathroom around 10 p.m. I'm about to walk out of the bathroom, and the dogs start barking. As I'm walking back, I see my boyfriend is standing in the entryway by the living room. He's focused on the front door and tense like I've never seen him. Again, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. He quickly ducks to the side of the front door window. Before I can finish asking what's going on, he tells me, "Shh, someone's out there." He approaches the door and looks out, but the person was gone. I rush over to him and he explains that he was sitting on the floor in the living room when the dog started barking at the front door. My boyfriend goes over toward the door and sees a black figure peeking into the window and then walk away. When I looked out, no one was there anymore. I'm absolutely terrified at that point, so I text his son to make sure again that it wasn't him. Turns out, a few weeks prior, he asked me to go to a wedding with him, and I gently replied, my boyfriend, who the son knew about, wouldn't think that was appropriate. So when I asked him if he had stopped by the house, he replied, "My girlfriend doesn't think it's appropriate that you are texting me so late." I apologized and told him I had a safety concern and it was important. I told him what my boyfriend saw. He simply responded that he didn't stop by. At that point, we were done for the night. We put the dogs in their kennels, waited a little bit, and ran to my car. The next day, I very quickly took care of the dogs in the morning and left before the owner got back. I've never felt such a deep electric sense of imminent danger like I did that night in bed. That was just too much. When the owner asked me back a few months later, though I desperately needed the money as a broke student, I politely declined. This event happened in 2018, and I was 15 at the time. My mom and I would usually go to the laundromat every 2 weeks or so, depending on how much dirty clothes we had. We usually go during the weekends because we were exhausted from work and school during the week. It was a Saturday, so that meant laundry day, so we got our clothes together and went to the laundromat. We loaded the clothes in the washers and had to go run some errands while the clothes were washing. We came back to move the clothes into the dryers. We had some groceries in the car, so my mom decided we could just put the clothes in the dryers, go take the groceries home, and come back to wait out the remaining time on the dryers. We did all of that and came back to the laundromat. While we were pulling in, I noticed a large brown pickup truck waiting to pull out. I made slight eye contact with the man in the truck, and as we pulled into a parking space, he made a U-turn and parked beside us. He was parked on the driver's side of our car, and I was sitting in the passenger side, while my mom was in the driver's side. Me and my mom sat in the car for a while, looking at our phones and talking to each other. I would occasionally look over and notice the man staring directly into the car. He looked like he was in his mid-30s. I didn't really think anything of it, and would just awkwardly smile back sometimes. A few minutes later, the man got out of his truck and leaned against his passenger side door, which was on the driver's side of our car. I made a joke about it to my mom, saying that he probably wanted to talk to her since she was so pretty. We laughed about it and continued doing whatever on our phones. I couldn't help but feel a little creeped out because he kept staring directly into the car. My mom told me to get out and to go check on the clothes, but I was too creeped out to get out of the car by myself, so I told her I'm not getting out because that man was standing right there. She agreed that I should stay in the car and got out. The man moved a bit when she got out to give her some space. He was parked pretty close to our car. I locked the doors behind her since this was something that she always told me to do, and this time it actually felt necessary to do so. She said hi and he nodded back. She went in and checked on the clothes. The man ran to the passenger side of the door and tapped on the glass. I pretended not to hear it and just looked at stuff on my phone. It started getting annoying, so I looked up and the man was motioning for me to unlock the door. Now, I wasn't dumb and I had common sense not to unlock it, so I shook my head no. When I did that, he started banging on the window and repeatedly tugged on the handle to open the door. I got my phone out and typed in 911 on the call screen and held it up to the window, hoping that he'd get the message, but he didn't. My mom looked up to check on me and rushed outside and screamed at the man that I was only 15 and whatever he was trying to do, he needed to stop, or she was going to call the police. He immediately ran back to his truck and drove off. I went inside the laundromat with my mom, and the lady working there at the time told us that it wasn't the first time he's done that. She said that he had been coming in there for the past week, trying to talk to any woman or girl because he said he wanted a wife. After that encounter, we never saw him again, and hopefully we never will. I just wanted to share this because I was genuinely scared. I, 24 female, moved into a new neighborhood about 2 years ago with my partner, 33 male, and our child. After 6 months of living here, and the beginning of the pandemic, we started getting to know our immediate neighbors. They seemed to be homebodies and stay inside almost all the time. After a bit, they started coming out to talk more, and we all seemed to get along. I considered inviting them over a few times, but they can be a bit awkward and difficult to keep conversations going with. We've done paint nights outside a few times, but we haven't invited each other inside ever. A couple seems to come outside whenever we are outside, coincidentally. They include themselves in our activities and chat here and there. We felt like we've brought them out of their shells and given them some socialization that they needed, since they dwell inside in the dark playing video games constantly. I gave my number to the girl when we had an issue between units, just in case of emergencies. We've sent a few messages about the property management, weather, etc., but only a few. Lately, I haven't seen the woman out as much as before, but the guy is outside every time I am. He started sitting in a lawn chair on his front step daily for hours. Fast forward, a friend of mine comes to spend the night. I introduce the neighbor guy to my friend, to be polite. He meets her dog and says a few random things. Then he's back to sitting on the step for several hours that night. Some days later, he signals me with a psst and asks if everything is okay. I tell him I'm fine and ask what he means. He proceeds to tell me I was sending him mixed signals when my friend was over and he just wanted to make sure I'm alright, which didn't make a single bit of sense, but I said sorry for the confusion. I assured him I was fine and I went about my business. A couple more days pass. I get a text from him saying who it is and he hopes my child and I have a great day. I didn't give him my number, so I found it to be inappropriate and I didn't answer. I started realizing he's been outside in the morning at the time I leave for work daily. He'll be outside within 15 minutes of me getting home, regardless of the time. The guy stays out until 4 a.m. some nights. Crazier part is, he's inside with 20 minutes of me leaving. We'll stay outside for 14 full hours, as long as I'm home. Doesn't go out if my partner is home and I'm not. Doesn't come out if no one's home. Will know if I'm home, even when I switch cars with my partner. I'm uncomfortable, but I don't want to point fingers to make it worse. But this dude won't talk to my partner, hardly acknowledges him at all. Meanwhile, finds ways to talk to me. Tries to help walk my dogs to the car for me. Tries to play games with my child. Knocks on my door, asking if I've lost random items that aren't mine, and has texted me a few more times. I've seen all of this on security cameras. Since we've been paying attention to the odd behavior, I can't tell if it's a super weird coincidence, or if he's purposely watching me or something. Not to mention, he makes hand gestures and speaks to himself with no phone out, no headphones. I'll walk a few doors down and visit the other neighbors, and he gets the mail, which he's never done, in front of the house I'm in. Later, he tries to meet those neighbors. Another time, I mentioned a yard sale I was having up the road. He never takes walks, but that day he decided to, and I get a new game console. He gives me two $60 games. The other neighbor said he's never sat outside like this before, not for the past 5 years. His girlfriend has been questioning him about it. I walked out and overheard her upset, with him replying sarcastically, "That's the kind of guy I am." She also mentioned he had his meds changed months ago when an ambulance came for him. Let's not forget, my boyfriend's car tire was randomly slashed in our neighborhood. Am I paranoid over odd coincidences, or do I need to move? I, 27 female, was at the laundromat today with my father and 1.5-year-old. To kill some time between loads, I took my extremely active Todd outside where he couldn't destroy things. There was a gas station about 30 yards next door, and there was a 6-foot chain-link fence halfway between that separates the lots. The area directly next to the laundromat that connected to the fence, though, was a little grassy, sandy, open area with one large tree right in the center. My son runs outside and turns and starts running around in this area, laughing and playing, which is great. After about a minute, he starts running up diagonally towards the fence in the direction of the gas station. I'm laughing behind him, watching his little legs go, when, all of a sudden, I hear footsteps approaching behind me. So I turn and look, and I kid you not, it was like the movie Get Out. This man was just straight knee to chest, running straight towards my child with manic eyes. I bolted and scooped him up and darted back into the laundromat so fast. I glanced back over my shoulder when I was taking off, and the guy was now on his knees laughing and rolling around and being all weird. I'm not sure if he was mentally ill or high, but I was shaking so bad because I had no clue what his intentions were. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically. Though I have been deer hunting and I have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving, I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of the Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up and that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful. Mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season and, like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot that I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbit or owls. And the deer that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 p.m. and it was about 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up. Maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kind of like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming out from the road where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage. Sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about to this day. He squatted and placed both of his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. A very compelling female voice. Help, I'm lost. There was a long pause, but neither of us have moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in the front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? Help, please, I can't walk, the voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk when I first saw him, but he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. This is a fucking trap, I thought. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermal scope has an effect that makes animals' eyes appear white. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. Fuck off, I screamed in that direction. He stood upright and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction and I instinctively sensed a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. What would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. The next one will fuck you up, I said. Go away. He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling, and I knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and I didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived in my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time I told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone, and I never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about Wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mom, which is my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole of these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a Wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornbury in the middle of the night. Either way, thought I'd share. try to be as brief as possible and stick to the relevant events that are giving me this feeling. But the latest event happened last night and I didn't get much sleep, so apologies if I ramble or if I'm unclear. My wife and I recently purchased our first home after the birth of our daughter. Everything was as you would expect the first few months. Painting, decorating, renovating, basking in our newfound slice of the American dream. You get the idea. Unusual things started happening several months ago. One day I was getting home after work. I passed by a strange truck 2 or 3 houses down from ours. I say strange for a few reasons. We know literally everyone in our small neighborhood, and I'd never seen this truck or person before. There's no reason for through traffic to come down our street. And the truck was driving very slowly. Like, put it in drive but don't press on the gas slowly. As I pulled in the driveway, the truck flipped a U-turn and came back towards my house. Getting out of my car, the truck crawled by and the driver stared daggers at me as he passed, then sped off. I don't like to judge based on appearances, and I like to think that I don't scare easily, but something about this guy's eyes gave me a bad feeling. Obviously, this was weird. I mentioned what happened to my wife, telling her we should be more mindful about security. When I told her the type of truck, my wife said, "That same truck drove by and the guy stared at me when I got home this afternoon. I thought he was just being creepy and checking me out." I tried to tease her a bit to lighten the mood, calling her cocky for assuming any guy driving by was checking her out. I didn't want to freak her out, but I was definitely freaked out. We saw the truck a few more times over the next couple of weeks, either driving by slowly or parked down the block and facing our yard. But one day, the truck stopped driving by and we haven't seen it since. I sort of dismissed the whole thing as me being paranoid. But then other things started happening. In the past month or so, my wife and I had been hearing tapping on the windows at the front of our house at night. It's happened 2 or 3 times to each of us separately, always around 10 or 11 p.m. And it's always a soft but distinct tap 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 tap. It sounds like knocking with a single knuckle on the metal part of a screen door. The first time that my wife and I heard the tapping together was last weekend. We were in the front room playing with our daughter around 9:30, just about to settle her down for bed. Our front room has a large, almost floor-to-ceiling window running the length of the wall next to the front door, which faces the street. We were all sitting on the floor with our backs to the window, reading our daughter a book, when we heard it. Tap, 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 tap. Now our house is older. Creaks and cracks are not uncommon, but this sound was so distinctly intentional that my wife and I immediately looked at each other and bolted up out of the room. I had my wife and daughter lock themselves in the back room and did a sweep around the outside of the house. Of course, I didn't see anything and I was ready to dismiss the whole thing as more paranoia over something that probably had an innocent explanation. Until last night. Around 9:45, we heard our daughter making noise in the baby monitor. I waited a few minutes to see if she would settle down, but when it became clear that she wouldn't, I got up to put her back to sleep. The layout of the room is important to visualize this next part. This room is on the side of our house, but the exterior wall juts out a bit in an L shape. In the corner of this L is made up of windows. If you are standing in the door to the room, you are directly across from these windows in one corner, and there's a rocking chair in the other corner pointed towards the front of the house. One window faces the street, and the other faces our neighbor's house. A garden bed planted with small shrubs wraps around the outside of the house, directly underneath. I was sitting in the chair getting my daughter settled down. I had a lamp on, so the room was softly lit. Once she fell asleep, I stood up to put her in her crib when something caught my eye. There was a figure standing about a foot away from the window, in the bare space between the shrubs and the house. They were staring at us. I didn't look long enough to see anything more than what appeared to be a man in a light gray hoodie, standing a few feet away on the other side of the glass. Sprinting from the room, I brought my daughter back to my wife and I's bedroom, leaving her there while telling my understandably confused wife to lock the door. After turning off all the lights inside the house and turning on all the lights outside, I began moving from room to room, peering out the windows into the darkness. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Whoever it was must have taken off after seeing me notice them and make a quick exit. Obviously, I had some trouble sleeping after this. I spent hours checking security cameras and going from room to room, looking out windows into the night, hoping but also not hoping that I would see anything that could explain what happened. This morning, I went outside to the spot where the figure would have been standing. I thought, or hoped, maybe there was a plant or something that I mistook for a person. When I got to the spot, I realized the figure had to be standing exactly in a bare patch of ground, about 2 feet in diameter, directly in front of that window. Part of me is still hoping that I'm being paranoid. The mind can play tricks on you in the dark. You know, seeing things that aren't there. Especially when you are a sleep-deprived new parent. But with everything that's been happening, I can't shake the feeling that there was actually someone out there last night, watching us. Please let me be wrong.